what happened in Belarus just a few days ago must be something that President Biden raises. I hope he will. The downing of the Ryanair was a hijacking, and the reporter, the journalist who was taken, must be released, as well as his friend who was with him. So unfortunately, there's lots to talk about on the negative side of the ledger.
Vladimir Putin responds to strength, and Joe Biden's a strong leader. So I think that this is, going to be an incredibly important meeting. At the same time, I think we should be careful about raising expectations. This is the first meeting between Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin. It's not a formal negotiation. This is an opportunity for the United States to make clear what we expect from Russia in terms of how they relate to us, but with respect to how they relate to our allies in the region, like Ukraine. And having made that clear, I think it will make it easier for President Biden to lead the international community in a response. Because let's also be honest, there needs to be a coordinated international response. The United States and Europe acting together. That's the only way you're going to ultimately make Vladimir Putin pay a price. One of the reasons why we feel so strongly about Nord Stream 2 is because we don't understand why Europe joins with us in sanctions against Russia, but then allows them to build a pipeline. That's a mixed message that I don't think is helpful.
It's a long way from now until completion of the pipeline and until it actually is operational so that gas is going through it. And we need to continue to take action that we can to try and stop it. I intend to do everything I can to try and stop the pipeline.
Among the things that we learned during our trip to Ukraine in speaking with all the senior government officials, including President Zelensky, about Nord Stream 2, the fact that Russia has for years been playing energy politics with Ukraine. At the end of the day, they usually allowed the gas to go through because it was in their interest. But they used it as leverage on Ukraine. And that same leverage will now be applied to Europe directly. So it won't go through Ukraine anymore should this be completed and licensed. But it does put the Europeans in a similar situation to where Ukraine has been over time. And you look at the history, it's a good point. And I hope that our European friends are looking at that history and understanding that it doesn't come without a price.
I think the best thing we can do to ensure that Russia understands what would happen should they invade Ukraine is to continue to support Ukraine militarily, as we have with providing weapons with a pact that would show that there's a partnership that will continue that military support. It's to continue to support Ukraine in its efforts at NATO to get MAP for NATO. It's to continue to help Ukraine as Ukraine is reforming some of the institutions in the country so that NATO and the EU look at those reforms and see that the values that Ukraine is experiencing and expressing are those values that are in concert with the West, not with Russia and what Putin has done.
The commitment to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO goes back to 2008 when NATO made a commitment to do so. What's happened since then that would make that less urgent? I would say nothing. In fact, it's more urgent than ever. So I understand the concerns about having NATO be involved with a country that's in a current conflict. But frankly, if they had come in 2008, I don't think the conflict would be there. My own view is that one of the few things that would dissuade Russia from making a terrible mistake and further invading Ukraine territory, because they already have, with regard to Crimea and with regard to the eastern regions, but further incursions and more kinetic military activity would be finally for the decision to be made that Ukraine is not only looking to the West, but the West is embracing Ukraine, and that Ukraine has made its decision. And I think that would help in terms of the conflict. I'm not sure what else would convince Vladimir Putin that it's not worth the continual harassment of Ukraine and the potential further invasion of Ukraine.
This obviously is a very unique circumstance. Never have we brought someone into NATO in which there is an active conflict, and you have to sort out exactly what that would mean for allies. That being said, NATO is both a security alliance and a values alliance, and so the reforms that are underway in Ukraine right now are absolutely critical to Ukraine being able to make the case that it should join the alliance. That it's remarkable that Ukraine has made so much progress in the middle of a war, right? I mean, to ask Ukraine to fight a war against an invading foreign enemy and to engage in dramatic political and economic and social reforms, that's a lot to ask. And Ukraine has stepped up.
One of the things we're going to be looking at is ways that we can support those efforts, that we can bring attention to journalists who have been jailed and threatened. I think hearings in Congress is one of the things we can do, continuing to speak out about what's happening, look at ways that we can provide support for entities who may have to operate outside of the countries like Russia where they are being threatened so that they can continue to do their work.
Disinformation needs to be combated with facts. And what Radio Liberty does and Radio Free Europe is provide the facts. And I know that's frightening to the leadership in Russia and the leadership in Belarus and other countries, but I still believe the arc of history is toward more transparency and more openness and facts, and that's what people need. There's also a specific issue in Russia as to the freedom of the press. And we've seen it time and time again, and the fact that they are not allowing you all to freely report, is an indication of that. In Crimea, we know that there have been human rights violations against minorities, including the Tartars, as an example. And so there's a specific concern there, but this broader concern is how do you combat disinformation? And the amount of funding and effort we put into combating disinformation, unfortunately, is very small compared to the amount of money other countries put into disinformation, including China, including Russia. But we're at least starting to push back, and that includes supporting a free press and allowing independent journalism to play a role here in providing the facts.